The briefing room at Bagram Airfield fell silent except for the steady hum of air conditioning units fighting the Afghan heat. Captain Marcus Reaper Rodriguez, a weathered SEAL team leader with 3 Purple Hearts and eyes that had seen too much, stood before a mixed assembly of pilots, ground crew, and support staff. His voice carried the weight of desperation masked as routine protocol. "We have a situation developing in the Kunar province," he began, his words clipping through the stale air like bullets. "Reconnaissance indicates a high-value target. Taliban commander Qari Zia is meeting with foreign fighters in a compound approximately 60 clicks northeast of here. Intel suggests they're planning coordinated attacks on 3 separate forward operating bases within the next 48 hours. The satellite imagery on the wall showed a complex nestled between jagged mountains, its mud walls and flat rooftops casting sharp shadows in the afternoon sun. Red circles marked suspected weapon positions, defensive structures, and escape routes that snaked through valleys carved by centuries of warfare." Rodriguez's jaw tightened as he continued. "Here's the problem. The compound sits in a bowl surrounded by peaks reaching 9,000 feet. Surface-to-air missiles confirmed at multiple positions. Standard approach vectors are compromised. We need someone who can thread the needle, someone who can get us in low, fast, and undetected through terrain that would make most pilots soil themselves." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the room, but they died quickly when Rodriguez didn't smile. The captain's reputation preceded him. When Reaper Rodriguez asked for volunteers, it usually meant the mission brief had been sanitized for public consumption, and the real story was far worse than anyone wanted to acknowledge. "I'm talking about nap of the earth flying through mountain passes where one wrong move turns you into Craterdaker," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Flying so low that goat herders could spit on your rotor blades. Approach vectors that require balls of titanium and reflexes faster than Taliban rocket-propelled grenades." The room grew heavier. Several pilots shifted uncomfortably in their metal folding chairs. A few maintenance crew members suddenly found their clipboards fascinating. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed like angry insects, casting harsh shadows across faces that had seen their share of impossible missions. Rodriguez scanned the room with Predator's eyes, evaluating each person with the cold calculation of someone whose decisions meant the difference between his team returning home or coming back in flag-draped boxes. His next words would change everything for one person in that room, though none of them knew it yet. "So I'll ask this once, and I need complete honesty," he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Any combat pilots here?" In the third row, between a grease-stained crew chief and a yawning intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Nix Phoenix Castellano sat perfectly still. Her calloused hands rested loosely on her knees, her dark eyes fixed on Rodriguez with the unwavering attention of someone accustomed to processing life-or-death information. At first glance, she appeared unremarkable, medium height, athletic build, with black hair pulled back in a regulation bun that had seen better days. Her flight suit bore the faded patches of multiple squadrons, and her boots showed the scuff marks of countless hours on tarmacs around the world. What Rodriguez couldn't see from his position was the small scar running along Phoenix's left temple, a souvenir from a helicopter crash in Iraq 3 years earlier. He couldn't see the slight tremor in her right hand that appeared only when she was calculating flight vectors under extreme stress. He couldn't see the dog tags hidden beneath her flight suit, which bore not just her own name, but also those of 2 crew members who didn't make it home from her last combat deployment. Phoenix had been in-country for 6 weeks, officially assigned to routine cargo runs and personnel transport. Her record showed competency ratings that were solid but not spectacular, efficiency marks that suggested reliability rather than brilliance. What her record didn't show was that she had requested the most dangerous assignments available, volunteering for flights that other pilots declined with creative excuses about mechanical issues or scheduling conflicts. The bureaucratic machinery of military personnel management had effectively buried Phoenix in routine assignments, a consequence of both institutional bias and her own reluctance to advocate for recognition. Female pilots in combat zones faced constant scrutiny, their capabilities questioned and their mistakes magnified. Phoenix had learned early in her career that survival meant keeping her head down, doing her job flawlessly, and letting her performance speak for itself, even when no one was listening. Rodriguez's question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished flare. Several pilots raised their hands with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Lieutenant Jake "Cowboy" Morrison, a Apache gunship pilot with a confirmed kill record painted on his helmet, raised his hand high and leaned back in his chair with characteristic bravado. Major Patricia Steele Williams, whose reputation for precision bombing runs had earned her commendations from ground forces across 3 theaters, nodded curtly and raised her hand with military precision. Phoenix remained motionless, her expression unreadable. Her hands stayed on her knees, her posture unchanged. To most observers, she appeared to be another support staff member waiting for the briefing to end so she could return to whatever mundane duties occupied her day. Rodriguez began evaluating the volunteers, his eyes moving from pilot to pilot with the methodical assessment of someone whose team's survival depended on making the right choice. He paused at Cowboy Morrison, whose swagger and confirmed combat record made him an obvious candidate. Morrison's Apache had provided close air support for dozens of ground operations, his rocket pods and chain gun turning Taliban positions into smoking craters. "Morrison," Rodriguez said, "tell me about close quarters flying in mountain terrain." Morrison straightened, confidence radiating from every gesture. "Sir, I've logged over 400 combat hours in Afghanistan. My bird can dance through valleys that would challenge a mountain goat. I've put Hellfires through windows from distances that other pilots wouldn't attempt with guided munitions." Phoenix's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly. Her breathing remained steady, but something in her posture suggested she was listening with more than casual interest. Rodriguez nodded slowly, then shifted his attention to Major Williams. "Steele, your assessment of the tactical situation." Williams consulted notes she had been scribbling throughout the briefing. "Sir, the compound's position presents significant challenges for conventional approach vectors. However, coordinated strikes from multiple directions could overwhelm defensive positions before they could effectively engage. I recommend a dawn assault with preliminary bombardment to suppress surface-to-air capabilities." "And if preliminary bombardment alerts the high-value target to evacuate?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the edge of someone who had seen too many operations fail due to overcomplicated planning. Williams paused, her confidence wavering slightly. "Sir, that would require alternative approaches." Rodriguez continued his assessment, moving through the volunteers with questions that revealed the gap between training and the specific requirements of the mission. Each pilot demonstrated competence, courage, and varying degrees of relevant experience. Each also revealed limitations that could prove fatal in the unforgiving terrain of the Hindu Kush Mountains. The briefing room grew warmer as afternoon sun streamed through small windows, casting long rectangles of light across the concrete floor. The air conditioning units worked harder, their mechanical humming providing a steady background rhythm to the increasingly tense conversation. Phoenix shifted slightly in her chair, a movement so subtle that only someone watching closely would notice. Her eyes moved from Rodriguez to the satellite imagery, then back to Rodriguez. For the first time since the briefing began, she appeared to be calculating something beyond mere attention to duty. The mathematics of the mission were becoming clear to anyone with sufficient experience to read between Rodriguez's carefully chosen words. This wasn't a routine insertion. This was a suicide mission dressed up as tactical necessity, the kind of operation that left helicopters scattered across mountainsides and families receiving folded flags instead of returning service members. Rodriguez seemed to sense the shifting mood in the room. His evaluation of volunteers was yielding pilots with courage, but not necessarily the specific combination of skills, experience, and perhaps desperation that the mission required. He needed someone willing to attempt what others would consider impossible, someone with nothing left to lose or everything to prove. "Anyone else?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying a note of growing frustration masked as procedural thoroughness. The question hung in the air for several seconds that felt like hours. Phoenix's hands remained on her knees, but her knuckles had gone slightly white. Whatever calculation she was performing in her mind was reaching a conclusion that would either end her military career or define it in ways she hadn't anticipated when she woke up that morning. In the silence that followed Rodriguez's question, Phoenix finally moved. She didn't raise her hand with the dramatic flair of someone seeking attention. She didn't announce herself with the confidence of pilots accustomed to recognition. Instead, she simply stood up, her movement so quiet that several people in the room didn't immediately notice. When Rodriguez's eyes found her, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. Here was someone he hadn't considered, someone whose presence had barely registered during his initial assessment. Phoenix stood at attention, her posture perfect but not theatrical, her expression calm but alert. "Lieutenant Commander Castellanos," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room without unnecessary volume. "Rotary wing, multi-engine qualified. 3 deployments, 2 theaters." Rodriguez studied her with the same intensity he had applied to the other volunteers, but something in his expression suggested he was seeing her for the first time. The casual dismissal in his initial glance was replaced by focused attention, the kind reserved for factors that could change the outcome of critical operations. "Experience with mountain flying, Commander?" Rodriguez asked, his tone neutral but probing. "Extensive, sir," Phoenix replied, "including nap-of-the-earth operations in terrain comparable to current operational requirements." The room had gone completely silent. Even Cowboy Morrison's characteristic fidgeting had stopped. Major Williams was studying Phoenix with undisguised curiosity, as if trying to reconcile this quiet figure with claims of extensive combat experience. Rodriguez consulted a tablet, presumably accessing Phoenix's service record. His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly as he scrolled through information that contradicted his initial assumptions. Whatever he was reading was changing his assessment in real time. "Commander," Rodriguez said carefully, "your current assignment shows cargo transport and personnel logistics." "Correct, sir," Phoenix responded without elaboration. "But your record shows interesting deployments," Rodriguez continued, his voice taking on a different quality, "including some assignments that aren't detailed in standard personnel files." Phoenix remained silent, her expression unchanged. Military etiquette and operational security protocols created boundaries around certain conversations, and she was clearly waiting for Rodriguez to navigate those boundaries appropriately. The tension in the room had shifted from routine briefing anxiety to something approaching electric anticipation. Everyone present sensed that something significant was developing, though few understood exactly what they were witnessing. Rodriguez set down his tablet and fixed Phoenix with a stare that seemed to strip away pretense and formality. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone who had learned to recognize capability regardless of how it was packaged or presented. "Commander Castellanos," he said, "step forward." Phoenix moved through the row of chairs with fluid economy, her passage causing minimal disturbance to others seated nearby. She approached Rodriguez's position at the front of the room and stopped at precisely the appropriate distance for military conversation, close enough for private communication, far enough to maintain formal respect. Rodriguez spoke quietly, his words intended for Phoenix alone, though the acoustics of the briefing room made privacy nearly impossible. "Commander, I need someone who can fly a loaded transport helicopter through mountain passes that would challenge an empty scout bird. I need someone who can navigate by terrain features when GPS is compromised by enemy jamming. I need someone who won't panic when surface-to-air missiles start lighting up the sky like 4th of July fireworks. Phoenix listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing about her internal assessment of the requirements Rodriguez was describing. Most importantly, Rodriguez continued, his voice dropping even lower, I need someone who understands that this mission has approximately a 60% chance of everyone coming home alive, and that those odds improve significantly with the right pilot making the critical decisions. The silence that followed Rodriguez's assessment stretched across seconds that felt eternal. Phoenix's response would determine not just her own immediate future, but potentially the survival of Rodriguez's team and the success of an operation that could prevent coordinated attacks on multiple American positions. When Phoenix finally spoke, her voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had calculated risks far worse than anything Rodriguez was describing. "Sir," she said, "I can get your team where they need to go." Rodriguez nodded once, a sharp movement that suggested decision rather than consideration. Whatever he had seen in Phoenix's record, combined with her response to his brutal honesty about mission risks, had convinced him to gamble his team's survival on a pilot that most of the room had barely noticed minutes earlier. "Briefing in 1 hour," Rodriguez said, addressing Phoenix but speaking loudly enough for the room to hear. "Detailed mission parameters, equipment specifications, and contingency planning. This is now classified at the highest levels." The dismissal was clear, though Rodriguez's attention remained focused on Phoenix. As other personnel began filing out of the briefing room, conversations erupted in hushed tones about the unexpected selection. Cowboy Morrison looked genuinely puzzled, while Major Williams appeared to be reassessing everything she thought she knew about Phoenix Castellanos. Phoenix remained standing at attention until Rodriguez gestured for her to relax. When she did, the subtle change in her posture revealed something that had been carefully controlled throughout the briefing. This wasn't just another assignment for her. This was something she had been waiting for, preparing for, perhaps hoping for since her arrival in country. "Commander," Rodriguez said, his voice now carrying genuine curiosity rather than tactical assessment, "off the record, why didn't you volunteer immediately when I asked for combat pilots?" Phoenix considered the question carefully before responding. Her answer would provide insight into character traits that could prove crucial during the stress of actual combat operations. "Sir," she said finally, "in my experience, the pilots who volunteer first are often those with the most to prove. This mission requires someone with nothing to prove and everything to lose." Rodriguez studied Phoenix for several seconds, his expression revealing approval mixed with something approaching respect. Here was someone who understood not just the technical requirements of dangerous flying, but also the psychological dynamics that separated successful military operations from disasters caused by ego and overconfidence. "1 hour, Commander," Rodriguez repeated, "and Phoenix." "Sir." "Bring your flight gear. We launch at sunset." As Phoenix headed toward the door, Rodriguez called after her once more. "Commander, one final question. That call sign Phoenix. Story behind it." Phoenix paused at the threshold, her hand on the door frame. For the first time since the briefing began, something approaching emotion flickered across her features. When she spoke, her voice carried undertones of pain that had been carefully controlled but never fully healed. "Sir," she said without turning around, "some birds have to burn completely before they learn to fly." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Rodriguez alone in the briefing room with satellite imagery that showed terrain capable of killing even the most experienced pilots, and the growing certainty that he had just witnessed something remarkable disguised as routine military procedure. Outside, Phoenix walked across the tarmac toward the helicopter maintenance hangar, her pace steady but purposeful. The afternoon sun cast her shadow long and sharp against concrete that radiated heat like a griddle. Aircraft engines provided a constant background symphony of power and precision, the mechanical heartbeat of a military base in active operations. As she walked, Phoenix's mind was already shifting into mission planning mode. The parameters Rodriguez had described weren't just challenging. They were designed to eliminate pilots who relied solely on training rather than instinct, courage rather than calculated risk assessment. The terrain features visible in the satellite imagery told a story of geological violence that had created flying conditions capable of destroying aircraft and killing crews with minimal warning. But Phoenix had flown through worse conditions, carrying heavier loads, with less support and more enemy resistance than Rodriguez's mission required. The difference was that her previous experience had been conducted in operational contexts that weren't discussed in regular briefing rooms or documented in standard after-action reports. The helicopter maintenance hangar smelled of aviation fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the distinctive metallic scent of machines pushed to their operational limits. Chief Warrant Officer Elena Wrench Vasquez looked up from an engine compartment as Phoenix entered, her weathered face showing surprise at seeing the usually routine transport pilot in the maintenance area outside of scheduled operations. "Phoenix," Wrench said, wiping grease-stained hands on coveralls that had seen better years. "What brings you to my cathedral of mechanical salvation?" Phoenix approached the helicopter Wrench was working on, a US-60 Black Hawk that showed the accumulated wear of multiple deployments. Bullet holes in the fuselage had been patched with aluminum plates that caught light differently than the original skin. The rotor blades bore scuff marks from objects that had passed too close during low-altitude operations. "Wrench," Phoenix said, her voice carrying uncharacteristic urgency, "I need this bird mission-ready in 1 hour. Full combat load, extended fuel capacity, and every system checked twice." Wrench paused, her hands still inside the engine compartment. In 8 years of military aviation maintenance, she had learned to read the subtle signs that separated routine requests from genuine emergencies. Phoenix's tone, posture, and timing suggested something significant was developing. "Combat load?" Wrench asked carefully. "Phoenix, your flight schedule shows cargo runs and personnel transport, nothing requiring combat configuration." "Schedule changed," Phoenix replied, her eyes moving systematically over the helicopter's systems with the focused attention of someone conducting pre-flight inspection. "I need maximum reliability in minimum time." Wrench extracted her hands from the engine compartment and wiped them more thoroughly, buying time to process this unexpected development. Phoenix Castellanos had been flying routine missions since her arrival, maintaining aircraft and completing assignments with competent professionalism, but nothing approaching urgency. This sudden shift suggested either emergency circumstances or mission parameters that extended beyond normal operational scope. "Phoenix," Wrench said slowly, "this bird was scheduled for routine maintenance. Nothing major, but she's been flying hard for weeks. Are you sure about pushing her into combat configuration without extended system checks?" Phoenix moved closer to the helicopter, her trained eyes identifying potential issues that could develop into critical failures under stress. Her hands traced fuel lines, checked hydraulic connections, and evaluated rotor blade attachments with the systematic thoroughness of someone whose life would depend on mechanical reliability. "Wrench," Phoenix said without looking away from her inspection, "how many helicopters have you worked on that didn't come back?" The question hit Wrench like cold water. In her years maintaining rotary wing aircraft in combat zones, she had prepared dozens of helicopters for missions that ended with empty parking spaces and memorial services. The mechanical precision of military aviation existed in constant tension with the chaos of combat operations, and sometimes precision wasn't enough to overcome enemy fire or pilot error. Too many, Wrench admitted, her voice carrying the weight of accumulated loss. Then you understand why I need this bird perfect, Phoenix said, finally meeting Wrench's eyes. Not good enough, not mission capable, perfect. Wrench nodded slowly, recognizing something in Phoenix's expression that transformed routine maintenance into personal mission. Whatever assignment Phoenix had accepted required mechanical reliability that exceeded normal standards, and the consequences of failure extended beyond routine operational risks. 1 hour, Wrench said, pulling additional tools from her equipment chest. Combat load, extended fuel, and every system checked twice. But Phoenix. Yeah. Bring her home. Phoenix started to respond, then stopped. The promise Wrench was requesting couldn't be made honestly, and both women understood the implications of that silence. Instead, Phoenix squeezed Wrench's shoulder once, a gesture that carried more meaning than words could provide, and headed toward the door. Phoenix, Wrench called after her. Whatever this mission is, fly like your call sign means something. Outside the maintenance hangar, Phoenix walked toward the building that housed flight operations and personnel quarters. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting longer shadows and painting the sky in shades that suggested sunset was approaching faster than the clock indicated. Her quarters were Spartan even by military standards: a narrow bed, a small desk, a footlocker containing personal items that could fit in a duffel bag. On the desk sat a photograph that most people would consider unremarkable: 3 people in flight suits standing beside a helicopter, their faces showing the relaxed confidence of a crew comfortable working together. Phoenix picked up the photograph, her thumb tracing over faces that belonged to people who wouldn't be flying any more missions. The helicopter in the background showed damage from small arms fire, and the expressions on their faces suggested they knew their luck was running out even as the picture was taken. She opened the footlocker and retrieved items that hadn't been used since her arrival in country. Body armor designed for aircrew use, a survival vest containing emergency equipment, and a pistol that showed the wear patterns of someone who had needed to use it for purposes beyond routine qualification. Each item represented preparation for circumstances that routine transport pilots rarely encountered. As she prepared her equipment, Phoenix's mind moved through mental checklists that extended beyond standard operating procedures. The mission Rodriguez had described required not just technical flying skills, but also the kind of tactical awareness that separated survivors from casualties in contested airspace. Enemy surface-to-air missiles, mountainous terrain, and time constraints created a combination that eliminated margin for error. Her hands moved through equipment checks with automatic precision, while her mind processed everything Rodriguez hadn't said during the briefing. Special operations teams didn't request specific pilots for routine missions. High-value targets weren't typically located in terrain that challenged conventional approach vectors. Mission parameters that included 60% survival odds weren't discussed openly unless the actual odds were significantly worse. Phoenix had volunteered for an assignment that would either establish her reputation as a combat pilot or end her military career permanently. There were no intermediate outcomes available when flying special operations missions in terrain that killed experienced pilots under optimal conditions. A knock on her door interrupted preparation routines that had become automatic over years of deployment cycles. Phoenix opened the door to find Rodriguez standing in the hallway, no longer wearing the confident demeanor he had displayed during the briefing. His expression showed the strain of someone carrying responsibility for decisions that could result in multiple casualties. "Commander," Rodriguez said, "mind if I come in?" Phoenix stepped aside, allowing Rodriguez to enter quarters that revealed nothing about her personality, history, or interests beyond basic military functionality. Rodriguez's eyes moved quickly over the sparse accommodations, noting the absence of personal items that typically accumulated during extended deployments. "Commander," Rodriguez began, then stopped and started again. "Phoenix, I need to be completely honest about what we're asking you to do." Phoenix continued preparing her equipment while listening, her hands moving through familiar motions that provided stability during conversations about uncertain outcomes. "The compound we're targeting isn't just strategically important," Rodriguez continued. "It's a trap. Intelligence suggests they're expecting us, that the high-value target is using himself as bait to draw American forces into a prepared killing zone." Phoenix paused in her equipment check, giving Rodriguez her full attention for the first time since he had entered her quarters. "Sir," she said carefully, "if you know it's a trap, why are we proceeding?" Rodriguez moved to the small window that looked out over the flight line, his posture suggesting internal conflict between duty and pragmatic survival instincts. "Because the intelligence they're planning to share at that meeting could prevent attacks that would kill hundreds of American service members," Rodriguez said without turning around. "Because sometimes you have to walk into a trap if the alternative is watching your people die from preventable attacks." Phoenix resumed her equipment preparation, but her movements had changed subtly. The mechanical precision remained, but her pace had increased slightly, and her attention to detail had become even more focused. "How prepared is this killing zone?" Phoenix asked. "Surface-to-air missiles at multiple elevations, overlapping fields of fire designed to eliminate aircraft regardless of approach vector, and terrain features that channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones," Rodriguez recited. "Professional military planning by people who understand how American forces operate." The silence that followed Rodriguez's assessment stretched across several minutes while Phoenix completed her equipment preparation. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the calm certainty of someone who had made peace with whatever decision she was about to announce. "Sir," Phoenix said, "are you asking me to withdraw from the mission?" Rodriguez turned from the window, his expression revealing genuine conflict about the answer he was about to provide. "I'm asking you to understand that this mission has moved beyond calculated risks into confirmed enemy preparation for our arrival," Rodriguez said. "I'm asking you to make an informed decision about whether you're willing to fly into terrain specifically designed to kill American helicopters." Phoenix finished securing her survival vest and faced Rodriguez directly. When she spoke, her voice carried undertones that suggested this conversation was addressing questions she had been asking herself since accepting the assignment. "Sir, with respect, every combat mission involves flying into terrain designed to kill American helicopters," Phoenix said. "The difference is whether the pilot understands the risks and has sufficient skill to manage them." Rodriguez studied Phoenix's expression, searching for signs of bravado, overconfidence, or the kind of reckless determination that got people killed in situations requiring tactical precision rather than heroic sacrifice. "Phoenix," Rodriguez said quietly, "what happened to your previous crew?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Phoenix's hands went completely still, and something in her expression suggested Rodriguez had asked about circumstances that weren't typically discussed in routine conversations. "Sir," Phoenix said after several seconds, "they died because I wasn't skilled enough to keep them alive." Rodriguez nodded slowly, recognizing honesty that most people would avoid sharing, especially in professional military contexts. Phoenix's willingness to accept responsibility for outcomes beyond her control suggested either unhealthy guilt or the kind of brutal self-assessment that sometimes produced exceptional performance under extreme stress. "And you think this mission offers an opportunity for redemption?" Rodriguez asked. Phoenix shouldered her equipment bag and moved toward the door, her posture indicating readiness for departure rather than continued conversation. "Sir," she said, I think this mission offers an opportunity to do my job correctly. Rodriguez followed Phoenix out of her quarters and across the tarmac toward the helicopter maintenance hangar. The afternoon sun was painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber that would transition to deep purple as sunset approached. Aircraft engines provided a constant mechanical symphony that spoke of preparation, departure, and the eternal cycle of missions that brought some people home and left others as memories honored at memorial services. As they walked, Rodriguez found himself reassessing his understanding of the pilot he had selected for what could be his team's final mission. Phoenix Castellanos wasn't just competent. She was carrying emotional weight that could either motivate exceptional performance or lead to decisions influenced more by guilt than tactical necessity. Phoenix, Rodriguez said as they approached the hangar, I need to know that you're flying this mission for the right reasons. Phoenix stopped walking and faced Rodriguez directly. The question he was asking demanded honesty that could be uncomfortable for both of them, and her response would determine whether he allowed her to risk not just her own life, but the lives of his entire team. Sir, Phoenix said, her voice carrying complete certainty, I'm flying this mission because your team deserves a pilot who won't make the same mistakes twice. The hangar ahead showed signs of intense activity as Wrench and her maintenance crew worked to prepare the US-60 for combat operations. Fuel trucks, ammunition handlers, and technical specialists moved with the focused urgency of people who understood that mechanical precision could determine whether aircraft returned from missions or disappeared into the mountains that had claimed too many helicopters over the years of American involvement in Afghanistan. Rodriguez and Phoenix entered the hangar to find the Black Hawk transformed from routine transport configuration to full combat readiness. Additional fuel tanks, defensive armament, and electronic countermeasures had been installed with the systematic thoroughness that characterized military aviation maintenance under combat conditions. Wrench looked up from final system checks as they approached, her expression showing satisfaction with work completed under tight time constraints. She's ready, Wrench announced, wiping her hands on coveralls that showed evidence of the intensive preparation the helicopter had received. Combat load, extended fuel capacity, and every system checked twice as requested. This bird will get you where you need to go. Phoenix conducted her own pre-flight inspection, her trained eyes moving over systems that would shortly be tested under conditions designed to destroy aircraft and kill crews. Her hands traced control surfaces, checked fluid levels, and evaluated mechanical connections with the systematic attention of someone whose survival depended on finding problems before they developed into critical failures. Wrench, Phoenix said as she completed her inspection, thank you. Wrench nodded, understanding that the gratitude extended beyond routine maintenance support. Whatever mission Phoenix was preparing for required mechanical reliability that exceeded normal standards, and Wrench's preparation could determine whether Phoenix returned to express gratitude in person. Phoenix, Wrench said quietly, fly smart. As sunset approached, Rodriguez's team began arriving at the hangar in small groups. Each member carried equipment that spoke of extensive combat experience and preparation for circumstances that challenged survival. Their faces showed the focused calm of professional soldiers preparing for operations that required precision under extreme stress. Staff Sergeant Tommy Ghost, Chen checked communication equipment with the methodical attention of someone who understood that radio failure could isolate ground forces from extraction and support. Petty Officer Marcus Bull, Washington secured medical supplies with the grim efficiency of someone who had treated combat wounds under enemy fire. Corporal Isabella Spike Rodriguez, the captain's younger sister and the team's explosive ordnance specialist, prepared demolition equipment with casual competence that masked years of training in creating and destroying things under combat conditions. Each team member represented specialized skills that would be essential for mission success, and each understood that their survival depended on Phoenix's ability to navigate terrain that had been specifically prepared to kill American aircraft. The casual conversation and routine equipment checks couldn't completely mask the tension that accompanied missions with low survival odds and high strategic importance. Phoenix completed her pre-flight procedures and approached Rodriguez, who was conducting final coordination with team members. Her expression showed the focused calm that preceded difficult missions, and her posture suggested readiness for departure rather than continued preparation. "Sir," Phoenix said, "aircraft ready for departure." Rodriguez consulted his watch, confirming that sunset timing aligned with mission parameters that required approach to the target compound under cover of darkness. The transition from daylight to full darkness would provide concealment for the helicopter's approach, while creating navigation challenges that required exceptional piloting skills. "Team, listen up," Rodriguez announced, his voice carrying across the hangar. "Final briefing in the aircraft. We launch in 15 minutes. The team gathered around the Black Hawk as Rodriguez outlined mission parameters that hadn't been discussed in the general briefing. Phoenix listened, while completing final checks on systems that would shortly be tested under conditions designed to eliminate American aircraft and personnel. "Insertion point is a clearing approximately 2 clicks from the target compound," Rodriguez began, his voice compete with the mechanical sounds of aircraft preparation. "Phoenix will provide transport and extraction, maintaining position for rapid departure once objectives are completed." Phoenix nodded, understanding that her role extended beyond simple transportation. She would be responsible for keeping the helicopter operational and accessible, while Rodriguez's team conducted ground operations in terrain controlled by enemy forces expecting American arrival. "Extraction timing is critical," Rodriguez continued. "Maximum time on ground is 40 minutes. After that, enemy reinforcements will make departure problematic regardless of aircraft capability." The team acknowledged understanding with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had conducted similar operations under comparable time constraints. Each member understood that mission success required completing objectives and reaching extraction point within narrow timing windows that eliminated margin for delays or complications. As final preparations continued, Phoenix found herself studying the faces of team members who were trusting their survival to her flying skills. Each person represented family members who expected them to return from deployment, careers built over years of military service, and expertise that couldn't be easily replaced if lost to enemy action or pilot error. The weight of that responsibility settled across Phoenix's shoulders like familiar armor. She had carried similar responsibility before, with results that haunted quiet moments and motivated preparation for missions exactly like the one they were about to undertake. Rodriguez approached Phoenix as his team completed final equipment checks. The conversation they were about to have would address operational details that separated successful missions from disasters memorialized in after-action reports and casualty notifications. "Phoenix," Rodriguez said quietly, "once we're inserted, you'll be alone out there for up to 40 minutes. If we don't make extraction timing, you'll need to decide whether to wait for us or save the aircraft for future missions." The choice Rodriguez was describing represented the kind of decision that defined military careers and personal character. Phoenix's response would determine not just tactical procedures, but also how she would be remembered if the mission failed and resulted in multiple casualties. "Sir," Phoenix said without hesitation, "I'll be there when you need extraction." Rodriguez studied Phoenix's expression, searching for signs of overconfidence or unrealistic commitment that could lead to decisions that cost additional lives rather than saving them. "Phoenix," Rodriguez said carefully, "I need you to understand that heroic gestures that get pilots killed don't help anyone. If circumstances make extraction impossible, I need you to be smart about preserving assets for future operations." Phoenix met Rodriguez's gaze directly, her expression showing understanding rather than naive determination. "Sir," she said, "I understand the difference between courage and stupidity. I'll be there when you need me, and I'll be smart about how I get there." The conversation was interrupted by Wrench's final systems check, confirming that the Black Hawk was mechanically ready for departure. Fuel levels, ammunition loads, and electronic systems showed green status indicators that represented thousands of hours of maintenance expertise applied under time constraints that eliminated margin for error. "Aircraft ready for departure," Wrench announced, stepping back from the helicopter with satisfaction that came from work completed to the highest possible standards. Phoenix climbed into the pilot's seat and began startup procedures that would transform mechanical systems into controlled flight. The turbine engines spooled up with increasing intensity, their characteristic whine building toward the steady roar that meant controlled power available for demanding flight operations. Rodriguez's team secured themselves in the cargo compartment, their equipment arranged for rapid deployment upon arrival at the insertion point. Each person performed final checks on individual systems, while Phoenix completed pre-flight procedures that would shortly be tested under conditions that challenged both aircraft and crew. As the helicopter lifted off from Bagram Airfield, the last light of sunset painted the mountains in shades that would soon transition to the complete darkness that provided concealment for special operations missions. Phoenix adjusted course toward terrain that had been specifically prepared to destroy American aircraft, carrying passengers whose survival depended on her ability to navigate challenges that had defeated other pilots with comparable experience and training. The flight toward the target compound would take approximately 90 minutes, crossing terrain that ranged from relatively safe airspace to valleys controlled by enemy forces, equipped with weapons designed specifically to destroy helicopters. Phoenix's route planning would need to balance time constraints against survival requirements, finding paths through mountains that offered concealment while avoiding known threat positions. As they gained altitude and turned toward the Hindu Kush Mountains, Phoenix felt the familiar transition that occurred when routine military operations shifted into combat missions. Every system, every decision, and every moment of flight would shortly matter in ways that eliminated second chances and forgave no errors. Behind her, Rodriguez's team prepared for insertion into terrain where their survival would depend on tactical skills, mutual support, and Phoenix's ability to provide extraction when their mission was complete.